From Los Alamos National Laboratory, this is the National Security Science Podcast.
It's a really difficult thing to do, and it takes years. There's just a lot of hard work and dedication to build something like this. And it's a rather obscure thing to do, right? Being interested in nuclear fusion at a young age. That's really exciting to see people interested in our field and trying to actually become a part of it at a young age.
Welcome to the National Security Science Podcast, the podcast for Los Alamos National Laboratory's National Security Science magazine. In today's episode, we're talking about fusion. That's the focus of the next issue of our magazine. National Security Science writer Jill Gibson is joining me today to share some highlights from that issue. Jill, you've written several articles about fusion, both for this issue of the magazine and also for previous issues in the magazine. Why is fusion research so important for the lab?
Well, Brenda, Los Alamos scientists have been studying fusion for decades, really ever since the lab was founded. That's because understanding how fusion works and achieving fusion conditions on Earth are crucial for the lab's national security work.
So in other words, fusion plays a key role in modern nuclear weapons. The fact that fusion research is taking place at the nation's nuclear weapons laboratories isn't a coincidence. Although Los Alamos scientists pursue the basic physics knowledge and energy applications of fusion, national security is at the heart of their work. Understanding fusion enhances scientists' ability to design, certify, and assess the nation's nuclear deterrent, which currently consists of 6 thermonuclear weapons. These weapons use both fusion and fission to work.
That's right. Fusion plays a powerful role in the design and operation of modern thermonuclear weapons, in which a fission reaction triggers a fusion reaction. In these weapons' first stage, high explosives compress fissile materials, usually plutonium, to start a fission reaction that releases X-rays. The X-rays compress and heat the secondary stage, which contains the fusion fuel, causing it to ignite and then creating fusion. A fireball hotter than the center of the sun forms nearly instantly, releasing kilotons of energy.
Los Alamos National Laboratory and fusion have a history. The lab is the birthplace of multiple fusion breakthroughs, and you can read more about that extensive legacy in the magazine. But one of the reasons I brought you here today, Jill, was to tell our listeners about a fusion researcher you met recently who actually doesn't have a long legacy in the field. His name is Aidan McMillan, and he's only 13 years old.
Yeah, it's impossible to conduct decades of research when you've only been on the planet a little over a decade. In fact, Aidan started conducting fusion research when he was about 8.5 years old. With adult supervision, he built a fusion device and produced fusion conditions just a few days before his 13th birthday.
That's totally wild. And I understand that this young man is planning to submit his achievement to the Guinness Book of World Records as the youngest person to accomplish this feat.
In fact, Aidan's decision to go for a world record brought Los Alamos National Laboratory into the story. After 4 years of research and hard work, he had successfully built a device called a fuser, and it was producing neutrons, the signature of fusion. There was only one problem: proving that. For that, he turned to the lab. Let's listen to Los Alamos researcher Robert Dwyer describe how he got involved.
I got an email one day. His mom was essentially reaching out to Los Alamos and asking if there's any kind of expertise that could verify his claim of achieving fusion and kind of help certify the device. So he reached out to some of the experts in the fusion group at Los Alamos. And it just so happens that I had built one of these machines before and been through the whole thing when I was in high school.
Wow, talk about a coincidence. It sounds like Aidan came to the right place. What did Robert do to certify Aidan's success?
I asked Robert to explain a little bit about the fusion devices that both he and Aidan built. They're called fusers, and there is a small community of science hobbyists who build them, though those scientists are usually older than Aidan. That's why it's important to point out that numerous adults helped ensure Aidan carried out this research safely. After all, he was working with high-voltage electricity.
This was an inertial electrostatic confinement device that people like to call fusers. So it uses electric fields to kind of heat and accelerate deuterium gas to kind of fusion conditions. And they produce very low levels of radiation, so they're relatively safe to work on. So what we kind of look for is, one, do they actually have deuterium gas? Do they have vacuum chambers and vacuum pumps that are able to achieve the conditions necessary for fusion? And then, we also look for ultimately the presence of neutron radiation. So when they apply voltage to the machine and it's filled with the deuterium gas, deuterium is the fuel or the fusion fuel. When two deuterium atoms come together and undergo fusion, they produce a neutron. And so you need very specialized detectors and equipment to detect these neutrons. And so that's one of the main things that we were looking for. Was the device built in a manner consistent with things that were known to work? And was there the presence of neutron radiation? And were the radiation levels consistent with the type of device that he built?
There were a few complications with getting Aiden's achievements certified. First of all, Aiden lives in Dallas. Plus, in order to enter the Book of World Records contest, he needed 2 researchers to sign off on his work. So to certify Aiden's work, Robert contacted the University of New Mexico nuclear engineering professor who had been his mentor back when Robert built his own fuser when he was 17. That professor, Carl Willis, flew to Dallas with a sophisticated neutron detector. With Robert watching through live video conferencing, they flipped the switch. Those little chirps you just heard, verifying the presence of neutrons, were the proof Aiden needed. He said the fuser also produced a glowing purple plasma, but it was the presence of the neutrons that proved without a doubt that fusion occurred. After 4 years of hard work, Aiden had achieved his goal.
Was it frustrating or fun?
Both. It was frustrating, and then it'd get to a point of it came together, and then it was fun for a bit, and then it was more frustration, but and it was a lot of work, but it ended up being worth it.
What do you think were the main things you learned from this experience?
A lot of critical thinking skills, mainly, and also learning how I learn, because that's an important thing that kind of, I think, gets ignored a lot of times. But with this project, I had to do a lot of research. There's no instruction manual for how to build the fuser, so I had to do a lot of research, and through that I had to learn a lot, and so I had to figure out what works best with my brain.
Now, one thing I should point out is that Aiden began building the fuser at the Dallas Makerspace, a community workshop and laboratory that caters to adults. While the folks there were eager to support and assist Aiden, his parents saw the need for a similar space just for teens and preteens. From there, they decided to launch Launchpad, a nonprofit science-oriented makerspace just for kids.
Tell me a little bit about Launchpad. Has that been fun?
Yeah, because I can actually interact with kids. That's the goal of the space, is to give kids an opportunity to, smart kids, an opportunity to be around other smart kids and finish projects, have the backing to finish projects. And we have the tools so that these kids can do what they want, and they can also, we can have a community.
That is so cool. Obviously, Aiden had a very supportive environment.
Absolutely. Aiden's mother, Shirin Faruti, explained that neither of his parents have a science background.
We're just, really good cheerleaders. Aiden, on the other hand, has been kind of very inquisitive, very precocious as a young kid. He was singing that periodic table of elements song when he was maybe 3 or 4 or something, very young, and got into these kinds of things early. So we knew there was an aptitude or serious interest and all of that kind of stuff. And he's a normal kid. He goes rock climbing, he plays in the band. Yeah, he loves punk rock. He's great friends. He's also a pretty well-rounded kid. I just think one of the sort of grounding values in parenting him all along, with both his dad and me has been like his social and emotional development, like that being more important than anything else. And so I think there's real value in being around kids his own age. But that's also why Launchpad exists, right? Because it was like, where are you going to find kids your own age who are also like incredibly brainy and love going down these crazy rabbit holes?
As you can see, Aiden got a lot of support from his parents, as well as from other adults and some Los Alamos scientists. Robert Dwyer says he's glad he got to assist Aiden in the quest to set a record. He points out that he and his colleagues at Los Alamos National Laboratory strongly believe in the importance of helping engage students in science, technology, and engineering.
There's a great story behind it that if you're really dedicated to learning something and being hands-on about it, even something as difficult as nuclear fusion is achievable. And so I think it's a really exciting story, and I hope it inspires other people to continue to pursue their interests and their talents. And we always want great talent and dedicated hands-on people working for us at the National Lab and working on science in the interest of national security.
One final note to any teens or preteens listening to this podcast and thinking about building a fuser. This kind of project always requires adult guidance and supervision. The good news is that there are lots of people who are ready and willing to help.
Absolutely, especially here at Los Alamos National Laboratory. Lots of people committed to making a difference in the world. In fact, now we're going to discuss a former Los Alamos lab director who made incredible contributions to the nation. I'm talking about Harold Agnew.
Agnew was the lab's third director, and National Security Science magazine writer Jake Bartman joins us now to share a little about this legendary leader.
In August 1985, 6 years after retiring from his position as Los Alamos Scientific Laboratories director, Harold Agnew returned to Los Alamos to give a talk. The applause that greeted him was thunderous.
Thanks very much, Don. It is indeed a pleasure to be back in this wonderful land and this remarkable laboratory.
Agnew was a legendary figure at Los Alamos, so much so that throughout his time as director and for years afterward, people at the laboratory referred to him by his first name only. He was beloved by Los Alamos staff for his willingness to speak his mind, even if that tendency sometimes landed him in trouble with decision-makers in Washington. But he also owed his legendary status to the fact that he'd been an active participant in many of the most important events of the nuclear era. Glenn McDuff, a physicist at Los Alamos who knew Agnew personally, once described him as a Forrest Gump of the new nuclear age, a participant in many of its most important events. During his 1985 visit to Los Alamos, Agnew set out to dispel what he saw as misconceptions about the early days of the nuclear era.
I find sometimes it's difficult to explain to audiences, if the ages are under 50, as to how we felt and what we did back in the 40s. But what I'd like to do this morning is endeavor to sort of retrace what did transpire and when things started.
Agnew began his talk by recounting the science that made nuclear weapons possible, the discovery of the neutron in 1932, and the development several years later of the concept of fission, or the splitting of atomic nuclei.
So this now was in January 1939. So in just a little over 7 years from the discovery of a particle, a complete new concept was conceived.
Agnew explained how Leo Szilard and other physicists visited Albert Einstein, asking Einstein to sign a letter they'd written to President Franklin Roosevelt. The letter warned that Germany, which was growing increasingly belligerent, might develop nuclear bombs and argued that the U.S. government should therefore develop its own nuclear research program.
Now, during those days, we were talking 1939, there was a tremendous fear of Germany. People say our lives are governed by either fear or greed or love or hate. And I think in this instance, we were very frightened in this country of Germany. And of course, if you look at the individuals who joined the project subsequently, Teller, Szilard, Wigner, von Neumann, Bethe, Segre, they all left Europe because of fear of what Hitler and Mussolini were doing.
Persuaded by the physicist's letter, Roosevelt approved funding for a secret nuclear program. Soon afterward, Germany invaded Poland and the Second World War began. Agnew recalled the day that Japan attacked U.S. forces at Pearl Harbor, drawing the United States into the war.
Now, it was on the 7th of December, 1941. Many of you weren't around then. I remember it was a Sunday morning, and I remember hearing the news, and again, it was this fear that sort of overcame most of us because we suffered a tremendous defeat in personnel and material at Pearl Harbor.
The United States soon accelerated its nuclear research. At the University of Chicago in late 1942, Agnew, who was a graduate student, stacked graphite blocks and did other grunt work to help build Enrico Fermi's CP-1 reactor, the world's first nuclear reactor. Agnew was then recruited to Los Alamos, where construction was underway on a secret laboratory that would become the center of the Manhattan Project. Led by physicist J. Robert Oppenheimer and Army General Leslie Groves, the project brought some of the world's most brilliant scientists to the mountains of northern New Mexico to develop the first nuclear weapons.
One of the unsung heroes of this whole project, of course, has been General Groves. Groves, had he been 6'4" and lean and trim, probably would have become a national hero, but he wasn't. Pictures you've seen of him sort of looks as if he doesn't sleep, or if he does sleep, he doesn't take his clothes off. But he was, I would say, most responsible for the success of the total project.
At Los Alamos, Agnew supported the Manhattan Project by studying materials such as uranium and plutonium to better understand how they would behave inside a bomb. Although Agnew's work was important, he and the other young scientists sometimes wished that their participation in the war was more direct.
We wanted to get into the war. We wanted to do something, because our parents really didn't know where we were, and they, of course, would talk to their neighbors, and their neighbors' children were actually in the war, and they would ask, where's your son? Well, we sort of don't know. And the impression was not a favorable one.
Partly in some sense to get into the war, in the summer of 1945, Agnew vied to become one of several dozen people from Los Alamos who traveled to Tinian Island in the Pacific Ocean, where the United States was preparing to drop on Japan the nuclear bombs that Los Alamos had built. Agnew himself knew little about the particulars of these missions.
On the 5th of August, we were asked to show up in this particular Quonset hut, and we were told that at like 2 o'clock that morning we were going to take off. We had no guns on our airplanes except for the tail gun. Because of the mass of the bombs, 10,000 pounds, all the armament had to be stripped off, and all the turrets were taken off the aircraft.
Agnew witnessed the bombing from a follow plane called the Great Artiste. During the mission, he deployed instruments that he'd helped develop at Los Alamos to estimate the explosive yield of the bomb. Meanwhile, an airman used Agnew's camera to film the only footage of the bombing. Agnew showed this footage during his talk in 1985.
First picture of a bomb cloud will be that of Hiroshima. That's it. Taken from one of those small portholes as we were leaving, which is all I wanted to do. Strictly because I was worried about getting back.
When the war ended, Agnew was just 24 years old. He returned to school, earning his Ph.D. in physics from the University of Chicago under Fermi's mentorship. He then came back to Los Alamos, where he worked his way up in the weapons program, becoming the laboratory's third director in 1970. Under Agnew's leadership, the laboratory more than doubled in size, expanding its research into areas with little or no direct connection to nuclear weapons, including energy, environmental and earth science, biology, and more. At the same time, Agnew remained a fierce advocate of nuclear deterrence. Throughout his life, he continued to argue that the Hiroshima and Nagasaki bombings were necessary to end the Second World War with as few casualties as possible.
There's no question in my mind, and maybe that's just because of the era in which was brought up, that we saved lives. We ended the war quickly. We wanted to win the war, we wanted to end the war, and that's what did transpire.
To learn more about Harold Agnew and his role in other central events of the early nuclear era, check out the article about him in the most recent issue of National Security Science magazine.
Yep, you can read Jake's profile of Agnew for insight into fusion research during the 1950s. This issue of the magazine highlights fusion research at Los Alamos and beyond. From early breakthroughs during the Manhattan Project to today's cutting-edge science, Los Alamos researchers have played a defining role in advancing our understanding of fusion.
Also in this issue, a comprehensive timeline traces key fusion advances over the past 90 years, including the first demonstration of fusion in a laboratory setting, which Los Alamos scientists accomplished in 1958. There's also a story I wrote called Targeting the Future of Fusion that examines ongoing fusion research that enables scientists to recreate specific conditions needed to assess the nation's nuclear stockpile.
And of course, you can read more about the young fusion researcher Aidan McMillan and much more in our latest magazine. You can find all the links in our show notes. Thanks, Jake and Jill, and thank you for listening to the National Security Science Podcast.